Bubba built it.
Hey everybody, on this video we figured we'd introduce Brawnco because we haven't done that yet. And I guess to start us off, what we started with was a 2004 Lincoln Navigator.
Yeah, so we thought we would talk about the process, the selection process of the donor vehicle.
Yeah.
And with the body swap idea, which we've done several of now, the process of choosing the donor vehicle is extremely important.
It's extremely important. And we wanted to get something that had a great platform, something with not a lot of issues going forward. And that's another cool thing about using something that's got some age on it, is that you know where the problems.
Yeah, you know where all the skeletons lie.
Right.
Also, you want to find something that's underappreciated. Otherwise, it's big bucks.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, we could have gone out and find a twin turbo, EcoBoost, whatever, and that would have worked, right? But that's, you're going to spend 10 grand on even a salvage one of those. So we didn't want to do that.
Yeah, right. And one of the things that kind of helped us along with this search and getting this idea of the underappreciated luxury vehicle was horse force. We chose a Lincoln Mark 8 chassis there, and it worked out great for us. And so we started looking at the Lincoln Navigators for this Brawnco build, and we chose the 2003, 2004. It was just the 2 years, right?
Only the 2 years.
Yeah.
So as those of you who are familiar with the mod motor, it's ubiquitous. It's the first major overhead cam V8 that any domestic automaker started to do. Of course, I think it came out in 90 or 89. You guys can correct me on that. Yeah. But of course, the Coyote, you could argue, is the ultimate development of that mod motor. But again, we're talking cubic dollars for Coyote stuff. So the next best thing is the 4-cam mod motor.
Yeah. So
because the Coyote is just that. It's a 4-cam mod motor.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Lee mentioned the 0304. The 0304 is, it's very special in the way that it had this really robust cast iron 5.4 with the Cobra dual overhead cam heads. Yeah. So basically it's the direct lineage descendant of the Coyote. And so much so, as we'll talk about later as we develop this project, that we're able to adapt a Coyote intake onto this engine, which is going to be another super cool
addition. Factor right there.
So anyway, the 0304 is the only 2 years that they had that dual overhead cam 5.4 in this updated chassis. Because now the earlier, the 90, 91, 92 Navigator, it had the same motor or the same engine, but they had it in an earlier chassis that didn't have rack pinion steering, didn't have independent suspension.
No.
So those 2 years. Oh, and again, the reason we want to go past that is because they went to the 3-valve motor, and they did it to save costs. First of all, the second thing is that 3 valves are really known for having problems with cam phasers.
Yeah.
The spark plug break-off issue.
Plug, yeah. And it's always the back one, the one that's closest to the fire plug that you cannot get.
I've never done one, but I've read Nightmare. I've seen Nightmare videos.
Nightmares. I don't want to touch that.
So we wanted to have that 4-cam motor, but in the updated chassis. And again, we've mentioned this before, but that updated chassis is awesome. Like, there's not much better that you could do, even from today's standards, on that chassis. So we're talking things like hydroformed frame rails. Yeah. They're very strong, fully boxed. That independent rear suspension with all the way on all 4 corners. You've got aluminum control arms. You've got this sophisticated strut setup. You've got rack and pinion steering, and you got this really nice 9 3/4 inch limited slip 373 gear set. And so it is like, yes. I mean,
it's got all the bullet points. Boom,
yeah.
Boom, boom,
boom. So that's what we chose. So now we go out in the great wild looking for one of these.
Facebook Marketplace, here we come. And we're digging. And we found one that sounded like it was a pretty good candidate up in
It sounded like
Tennessee.
You couldn't go wrong. But it was a 3.5-hour drive. Yeah.
It was
in western Tennessee somewhat.
Yeah, western Tennessee, yeah.
So it was a 3.5-hour drive. So here's the thing also. Like, you can find these in serviceable condition, soccer mom ready to jump in and take her kids to school, and they're about $4,500, and that's still really a great deal. I mean, when you look at it, but we hate ruining good things, even when they're worn, even when they're older. We hate ruining it. So we wanted to find one of these that had the suspension that was not working anymore. That's another thing. Like you can take the Expedition springs and struts and swap them out when the airbag suspension, because these had airbags on all four corners. You can find one that's sitting on the ground and someone doesn't want to mess with it. You can sometimes find those for $1,000.
Yeah.
But they're otherwise great. So we were looking for something like that, something that was either damaged or something that had a bad air suspension on it. And this one in Tennessee, they only went like $650 for it. They were like, yes, let's go get that one. It's worth the drive. That's the one.
And they'd already swapped out the airbags on it for coilovers.
Yeah, well, yeah, and we found out when we got there they had done a lot more than that.
Yeah, wow. I mean, they had started hacking into the frame. They were trying to cut it out, right? Well, we don't want to throw stones
I don't even
at
know
anybody.
what. I mean, I'm not sure.
Something bad happened.
There were probably some recreational substances involved in this whole.
As you can see here.
Well, when we got there, it was like, we're not even going to try to buy this because it was so bad. Literally, like we said, they had taken a Sawzall and halfway cut through the frame. But that's the thing. Like when you're looking for this, when you're trying to find that perfect bottom dweller example that still has the good bits, you're going to find some junk, and that's what this was.
Yeah, it was. But we ended up finding something that we were a little bit on the fence about because it was just so nice.
Again, yeah, it was nice. It had cold air. The cruise control worked. The paint was nice.
It was nice.
We picked the chassis because it's such a good chassis, but one of the big problems with this swap was we're going to have to shorten the wheelbase 15.5 inches.
Yeah.
And that is not an insignificant amount. On the Horse Force, we didn't mess with the chassis at all. We just moved the wheel well slightly. Sometimes, though, shortening the chassis is worth it.
Yeah.
But it does have, again, every modification you do comes with its own bag of problems.
Right.
And one of the biggest problems that we ran into with this was the gas tank.
Oh, yeah.
So we go to cut this thing apart. We know we're going to take 15.5 inches out. And, of course, okay, so should we talk about the teardown or should we go right into the chassis shortening?
No, let's talk about the teardown.
Oh, yeah. So now the teardown. That's another thing. Any kind of chassis swap, do not underestimate the amount of work that the teardown is going to take.
It's a lot.
It's a lot of work. So you start out, you take all the unboltable items off, right? So the doors, the hood, the fenders, the rear hatch, all these things. Yeah. And then you got to start figuring out what you're going to save and what you're not going to save. So as you look through, we'll show clips of all the parts we got sitting around. We have a pile of parts. But the teardown is a fair amount of work. And generally, if you're going to do it right, it takes you about a week.
Yeah. Yeah.
A week of mornings or afternoons or evenings or whatever.
Yeah,
but,
right.
So we got the teardown complete. Oh, cutting the roof off. That's another thing. You need to have a lift. You need to have an overhead crane or something, or at least 5 good buddies, or you and 4 good buddies.
Yeah. Because,
for instance, on this thing, the roof,
it's heavy.
I don't know. It probably weighed, what do you think, 300 pounds?
300 pounds at least.
Yeah, it had a sunroof in it.
Yeah.
You can use a Sawzall, which we did. You can even use, I don't know if we've figured out that a Sawzall with a coarse blade will go right through the windshield. So,
yeah.
Anyway, so there it is. Now we're ready. We're torn down. The roof is sitting on the ground. We took it off, and now it's time to shorten that chassis. So, once again, how are you going to shorten the chassis? There's not just one way to do it.
No, there's not. So you laid it out.
Yeah.
Through the floor plan, right behind the
right behind the front seats.
Front seats.
Since the front section of this frame is exactly the same as the F-150. But the F-150, as you know, did not have the independent rear suspension. No. They wanted it to be tougher. They wanted it to have that truck toughness that like for
towing.
You know, when you're bouncing up the hill on the big rocks and the right. So anyway, so what they did was they designed the front section to be modular and this Expedition / Navigator rear section to be able to be grafted in place of the straight frame section. And what we did, we figured out, we cut it right in front of the seam where the frame rails met up with the rear very complex frame section. And we were able to cut the weld and strip that away so that the front frame section indexed right into that rear section.
It was tight.
Yeah. So and so that's the other thing. So when you get this thing, before you cut anything, you want to set everything on the ground, get it on jack stands, get it level.
Yeah.
And then when you cut it, again, figuring out where to cut it's what we're talking about. Yeah. And then you cut it, and then you want to be able to bring it back together. And we use what's called a chain fall. And this is my first time using these. Evidently, that's something that every good fabricator should have, and I was really impressed with these. They're basically ratchet straps with chains. And we used 2 chain falls and pulled the 2 sections together and got the frame to index right into the socket of the rear frame section after we'd cut away the internal section. And then all it took was just a one solid weld all the way around that. We didn't even need fish plates, and it was as good as the factory weld, as good as the factory setup. But everything and of course you X everything out, you make sure all your cuts, you double check, you triple check, and we welded it up there. Everything was square and it looked great.
It was perfectly square. It did a great job.
So big step forward, big accomplishment, and boy, the thing, I think we got some pictures of it. It looks so funny sitting there with the 15.5 inches taken out. It looks kind of bananas. So we went from 117 something to a 104, I think is, and I might have this off. I'm doing it from memory, but yeah. So it looks funny sitting there. But now we had another big problem.
Oh, the AC lines. You got a lot of stuff running through there. So you've got your air conditioning. It's got rear air on it. Yeah. So you've got air conditioning lines, return and pressure and return lines. Heater. Yeah, the heater.
Fuel lines.
Yeah, the fuel lines, and then all this wiring. I mean, like a big old wiring harness.
A lot of wires. Yeah.
So all that has to be dealt with.
Right. Which and then the big thing that we had the problem. Well, of course, drive shaft is the other thing.
Yeah.
Always have to deal with the drive shaft when you shorten the chassis. Now, drive shaft. Let's talk about that because that's an easy one. Yes. You find any. We use Fleet Pride, and they're everywhere. But anybody that services big trucks are always having their chassis modified for different types of use, and so Fleet Pride is totally set up to shorten and balance drive shafts. And I think it was like $160, and that's with new U-joints and everything. Yeah. So that problem solved. Completely balanced as well. Now let's talk about again why we wanted that 0304 or that independent rear suspension, because we were getting this so short that, and actually I talked to a good friend of ours who worked for Roush back in the day, and he told us that he had done countless different chassis shortenings for Ford when they were trying to figure out how they could do a Bronco using the current setup. And he told us what we already had figured out. We were glad to hear that we'd made the right choice. But that independent rear suspension is very important when you're going as short as we were going, because that pumpkin or that chunk stays in place. Yeah. It does not go up and down. As you know, a live axle, one of the reasons it's live is because it's moving up and down, the whole thing. And when you have an independent, then the differential is sitting in place, it's locked in place, and so you have a much better way of dialing in and getting the perfect angles to dial out that resonance factor and the vibration. So that's another reason why that independent suspension was very important on one this short. But the other part of this, again, going back, was the fuel tank. Oh yeah. So we wanted to maintain the factory fuel pump, factory sending unit, all that. As we've known, a lot of our friends have done LS swaps and things, and they always have problems with the rail-mounted fuel pump. Well, we had trouble with ours on the Ruckus truck. We absolutely did. That's right. So we'd already heard tale, and then we had our own experiences. It is best, as you probably already know, to have an in-tank pump. And also, those systems are generally quite expensive. It's not uncommon to spend $700 to $1,000 on a custom tank with an in-tank pump setup. Yeah. But we didn't want to go through all that. So we thought, you know what? There's hundreds and hundreds of tanks out there available. Oh, yeah. For pennies on the dollar. And so we just started researching and say, what tank? Okay, that's the other thing. As I was doing the teardown, we dropped the spare tire, and we have this nice big area in the back. Yeah. Well, also, the original Bronco had the tank in the back. So we were looking at, and so the filler neck and all that was already back there. So the plan was to find a tank, a modern plastic tank that will accept the Ford, which has got a neck about that size, the Ford sending unit and fuel pump, but fit back there in that spare tire setup. And I got to tell you, I was so impressed with what we figured out. And this will probably work on a lot of different builds. And if you're ever up against this problem, you should probably look at it. I think it's called a TJ, or it's the 98-ish Jeep Wrangler. Yeah. Has a perfectly shaped tank. It's 19 gallons, so it's not a small tank. So it's still, so the tank that was in this thing was like 5 feet long, and I probably got a picture of it, but it was a huge tank, and after we shortened it 15.5 inches, there was no place for it. And so moving the tank was essential, but that Jeep tank accepted I had to have the tank and the little ring that goes in there. But it accepted all the factory pieces. The depth was close enough, and even the tank, the filler necks and all that went right in the Bronco filler neck area, so we didn't have to re-engineer that. So it was one of those very nice, and all it took was a little bit of research.
Right.
So instead of going out and spending cubic dollars on something, a lot of times if you do a little bit of time, spend a little bit of research, a bit of time in research, you can save yourself a lot of money and a lot of heartache.
Yeah, absolutely.
So all the big parts of this thing were figured out. The chassis is now shortened, fuel system, we cranked it up, we backed it outside. I think we have a picture even of it next to the Bronco. And so now you've got everything that you need in one package ready for the swap.
Yep.
So that was sort of the ethos of our low buck Bronco build.
Yeah.
And we've got the chassis now, the stance is beautiful, it's right. And next time we can talk about how we got the body on there and dealing with the stance and all the integration factors of that.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, hey guys, thank you very much for watching. Hit that like button, subscribe to us, and give us some comments. Thanks.
Thanks.
Something about a truck with a radical stance, 12-inch wheels, beater rapid advance. Getting sideways on the back road, let's take a chance. Something about a truck with a radical stance.